CORS, the topic that is sometimes the bane of developers' existences. When we see that red, line in browser console saying this has been blocked by CORS, we just die a little bit inside. So I'm going to show you the easiest way to deal with CORS with a serverless backend. So if you just want to know the solution right away, this is what you need to do. You need to have a list of predefined origins that you allow. And then on the request, so on each request that your Lambda receives, you need to make sure that if you're in the allowed origins, you add that to your headers, access control allowed origin. And then if you have a request with credentials, you need to add that header as well. Those two are required for CORS. That's it. All right, so let's go back to kind of a step-by-step process for CORS and serverless. So I've built a little sample application just on pizzadevs.com. And what we do is we can just enter in a URL here, and we can check to see if we can call it or if it will fail. So we'll call this one. All right. So we have a serverless API, as I mentioned. We're using the serverless domain manager plugin to get this nice URL here, api.pizzadevs.com. And I'm going to walk you through what's required to get this to be unblocked by CORS. Okay. So first off, how do credentials matter in this equation? So we're using our get request, which I'll show you, is using, kind of go into the source code here. All right. So if we go into the source code, if we go into how we're making this API call, we're using Axios, and here we're using a with credentials. So this means that we're going to be using either authentication header, cookies, or something to authenticate the call. For this example, we're not really using any of that stuff, but this flag for Axios basically says we're going to be sending credentials, so it needs to be a little bit extra secure. So we have that set, right? So we need two things for CORS to work. We need a header on the backend. So that sets the framework for what we're dealing with here. We're making an API call from this browser hosted at pizzadevs.com to a backend that we put here, and it's using the with credentials flag. So anything that we post here, any URL here that doesn't have CORS enabled, it's got to be the exact same origin. So in this scenario, we have api.pizzadevs.com, and we're calling it from pizzadevs.com. So is that the same origin? No, we're blocked by CORS, right? It's because this API here, it's using the same port. We're using HTTPS, so it should be 443. But since API is here in this URL, as a subdomain, it's a different host. So we still need to enable CORS, even though it kind of looks like it's the same domain because it is the same upper level domain, pizzadevs. Okay. So what I've done is I have two kind of scenarios for you. So I have a local version, just running on localhost, and I have the hosted version of pizzadevs. So both of these are going to have different hosts, right? We have localhost and we have pizzadevs. So let's go into our code. Let me give you a rundown of the code that we have, okay? So this is using serverless, Node.js, and TypeScript. We have two files that matter for this example. We have a root handler and a handler, okay? Let's go ahead and look at our handler. Very simple. We basically just automatically return a body with message no CORS issues. So if this API call is success, we're going to be returning that. So very simple, not much here. What we do is we wrap this handler, this endpoint, what it's going to be an endpoint with a root handler. This is what I like to do to make CORS easy because you don't need to worry about headers on all of your endpoints. You can do it in a root location and let most of your handlers be wrapped by that root handler. So let's check out what that root handler is. I'll leave this open. All right. So here's our handler on the bottom. That's what we just talked about. Here's our root handler. Okay. There's not much here. Don't worry too much about the types. But basically, yeah, don't worry too much about the types, but probably the important things to note are we have this lambda config, this is what we pass to our root handler, where we have the handler, which is a lambda, and then we have a flag for allow credentials. So not all of our API calls need to be passing this allow credentials, right? There may be some that you have for an endpoint that for your backend that doesn't need to pass that. So we have it configurable. The idea being you can configure this with whatever else you need to do in the future. All right. The next step is you need to have an allowed origins, right? So why does that matter for CORS? Well, CORS stands for cross origin resource sharing. It's basically saying I need to get, as a browser, it's a browser type of issue. As a browser, I need to get something from another server, right? That's not my server, right? It's not pizzadevs.com, it's api.pizzadevs.com. So since I need to get something from another server, that server has to be okay with me getting it. So that server needs to explicitly say that you're allowed to get it at pizzadevs.com or google.com or whatever if it's calling me from a browser, right? It's a security measure. So first off, you can't resolve CORS issues unless you have access to that server, right? Because it's got to be a server configuration for you to be able to call it. So I have access to the server. It's a serverless project, as I mentioned. And so we have one function here that basically will add our flag. We'll add our, basically have one function here that will check to see if my request that Lambda received is an origin that's allowed, right? And we explicitly say which origins are allowed. Now this can be in environment variables or whatever, however you want to do it. Here we're just going to hard code it, right? So let's go ahead. Let's try this out. So we are going to go ahead and add an allowed origin here. We're going to add localhost. And the port matters. So localhost 3000, right? So now we're going to, each time we get a request, because our Lambda has been wrapped by this root handler, what's going to happen is we're going to call the original handler, right? So this is going to be our CORS check, right? We're going to return this response is whatever our API returned with, and then we're going to add the headers for our CORS headers, right? If these aren't complete, it's going to be returning the issue that we saw on the other screen, blocked by CORS, right? So how do we generate these CORS headers, right? So first off, we have to grab the origin from the request. So for Lambda, we just go through the headers and grab the origin from the headers. Then we check to see if that origin is in our allowed origins by find, right? Then we add the allowed origin. Then we check to see if the Lambda, this specific Lambda that this request is servicing allows credentials. If it does, we need to add that one as well. Both of these are required if it's a with credentials request, okay? So we're gonna just run through a couple of the configurations to show you that this does matter, right? We just changed our allowed origins to 3000. Let's go ahead and deploy this change. All right. So we're just going to do yarn deploy. This is going to deploy our serverless project with the change that we made. Actually, let's make sure we save this. Rerun that. Let's clear out this stuff. pizzadevs.com/course. Copy that. Call that here. That's going to fail, right? So localhost failed and the hosted version failed, right? Now let's wait for this to deploy with our allowed origin of localhost. Basically, we're saying for our API, if we called it from api.pizzadevs.com, we wouldn't get we would not get a CORS issue, right? So basically, we're saying it's okay to call me from localhost, right? Which is not really something you want to do in production because anybody can run a localhost. And actually, even the origin can be spoofed, so it's not some, end-all security measure, right? You can still spoof your origin when you're making calls to a backend, but the browser is not gonna let that happen. All right, so we have deployed successfully, I believe. So we have deployed successfully. All right, so now let's go ahead and rerun it on Pizza Devs. This should still fail because this isn't an allowed endpoint, but this one should work. So we got our success, no CORS issues, right? That all happened because we added localhost to an allowable origin, right? Let's go ahead and add this Pizza Devs as an allowable origin, right? So here we go. We have another one, pizzadevs.com. Cool. Let's go ahead and redeploy. And let's see what happens. So right now we have our localhost failing, our localhost working, and our Pizza Devs failing. So now after this change, both should be working. So you can have as many origins as you want. But the key is that you can't have a lot of places you'll see online say just set access control allow origin to star, right? So basically the server basically says, I don't care, any origin can call my API. I don't care. Wildcard it, right? That won't that that will work for some APIs, but it won't work for any where you need to pass credentials like cookies or whatever like that. So that's why it's just better overall to just add this little bit of code to check the origin, right? All right, so now we just redeployed, so let's check this one. All right, so now we have localhost and our hosted version on Pizza Devs allowed to call this API, right? Because we have then on the allowed origins. Awesome. So now let's do what I was just saying. Let's just change it to star, right? So we're going to rename this to star. I'm going to show you that this won't work. So we're going to just make the same calls with these two, right? And now that it's star, we're going to see if this will work. But because we're using the access control, because our access request is using with credentials, this won't work. All right, so we are finishing up deploying. Great. So now let's try it from this one, which just worked previously. Now we're blocked. Let's check out this one, which worked previously. Now we're blocked. So even though we have the wildcard, it's still not going to work. That's because we have this access control allow credentials, right? So let's see. So one thing to note here is that we're using a GET request, right? So GETs don't have any option calls that fly. They don't send the pre-flight options to check to see if you can get. So you may need another config to do this. So if you want to do that, come to your go to serverless.yaml, right? We're going to check, all right, so here's our function, our CORS function. Here's add a CORS true. But this is only for options pre-flight. This won't do anything for your actual response. You still need the other one, right? And as you can see, we didn't have that on there for all of our other calls. So this is just something you can add later if for some reason you're failing on a pre-flight, options call. So that's the basic of CORS, make sure you have your access control allow origin referring to the domain that you allow. Don't allow just everything, because if you use with credentials, you need to have a specific one. A wildcard isn't going to work. And the best way to do that, just have a root handler and make sure that you add your CORS headers to all of your API calls that will be called from a different origin. So I'll share this code. It'll be in it'll be online. I'll share the link below so you can use this for whatever you need. But hopefully this helps you with any CORS issues that you have in the future. As always, please leave any comments if you have any questions or thoughts, and thank you for watching.